Hi everyone, my name is Brendan. I am currently a product owner at Spotify. I've been working for the company for just over 3 years now, 2 of those years as an Agile coach and 1 as a product owner. But before I begin, I just want to get a quick show of hands. Has anyone here read the Lean Startup? Wow, quite a few people. And did anyone read the Lean Startup and then walk away and go, okay, I know exactly what I need to do in order to actually live some of the values that's in that book? Yeah, me too. Is there any chance of getting this up here? Hey, there we go. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. Basically talk a bit about my challenge in working with the team at Spotify to really take the thinking behind Lean Startup and apply it within a big product company like Spotify. And sort of just give you a short idea of what some of the lessons are that we learned from going through that experience. Cool. So just a quick bit about me. As I mentioned, been an Agile coach in the company for about 2 years, working on infrastructure, working on Spotify running, and now I'm a product owner working with Spotify's desktop client. I'm also quite interested in innovation. And in terms of a little bit about me, I'm Australian, so I'm originally from Australia. I live in Sweden and work at Spotify's Stockholm office. That's me on the beach in Australia wearing green, living the brand, of course. And I'm a bit of a Dota 2 fan. That's me with S4, if anyone here is into Dota. Cool. So this all started around about August, September 2014. We had a very sort of explicit strategy in our company that we want to differentiate our product. So our product had started to become commoditized in the eyes of end users. It sort of got to a point where if you have a bunch of lawyers that can negotiate some agreements with labels and enough money, you can build a streaming product and it can be, as relatively as good as Spotify. So we needed to think hard about how do we differentiate our product so that when people are choosing which streaming platform they're going to use, they're going to pick Spotify. And the answer to that was we wanted to make sure that we were one step ahead of other streaming platforms by having a differentiated product. And the way that we chose to do that was for moments in your life where music is a part of it, we want to make sure that we provide an experience that's really great. So around this time that this strategy came along, we looked into our data and we saw that people are creating playlists around moments of their day. And some of these playlists are quite popular in terms of the total number of people creating playlists around these events. And running was one of them. So for people running to music, this was quite important. We also dug into the market opportunity. We looked at how many people are running in the US, and how, out of those people, how many have Spotify and how many don't. But just generally, we believe that if we put running and music together, this could be really cool. And we also believe that we have the technology. This is Henrik Niebuhr on a little Hack Week project at work. Okay, so we decided that we wanted to explore whether we should and could build a feature around running and music. So we came up with a hypothesis. Basically, we believe that a unique running experience will result in an increase of registrations from runners, of course, with a higher 6-month retention rate than regular users. So the thinking here is that if you're a runner and you start using this feature, you're going to be more likely to retain, because why else would you go to another product that doesn't have an experience specifically for you around running? And we believe that would have a knock-on effect in terms of generally our brand being perceived as being sort of one step ahead of the competition that we will be different, we will be better. And this sort of, everyone loves a good 4x4. This kind of generally explains our thinking behind this feature. You have runners and non-runners. Of course, we're not going after the non-runners. And of those people that run, who's listening to music, and can we get them to join Spotify? Pretty straightforward. So we got sort of funding from management to have a small group of people put together to figure out what could we do around running and music. And this is kind of an interesting thing because we know a lot about music, but we're not a running company. So this presented a very unique opportunity. Usually we're pretty good at building scalable working software around music and iterating on that. That's been our thing. That's what we're relatively good at. But in this case, this presented a really interesting challenge. What should Spotify build around the running use case, if anything? And I know I wrote that in really small text, but it's quite big because it's on a huge movie theater. But that's kind of key here. We were sort of told, we want you to go out and figure out what we should build around running. If anything, it's perfectly acceptable to come back and say, actually, this is a terrible idea. We shouldn't do anything at all. And this was, as I said, this was quite interesting for us because we have this mantra of product development called think it, build it, ship it, tweak it, or twerk it. And this think it stage is usually pretty straightforward. We have a lot of data on how people use our product, and we just sort of think about how we connect that data to some kind of end user experience, and we just build it and ship it. Put it behind an A/B flag, see how it performs, and we're done, right? It's not that hard. But in this case, this was one big fat think it project, and we realized we had to think about this a little differently because we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. So we quickly realized this became a product discovery project. And what I really love about this happened not too long after we got together as a team, and Henrik nearby posted this diagram on his Facebook wall, and it says Scrum in a nutshell. And what I really love about it is product discovery, or the idea of figuring out what to build, is represented as a fuzzy cloud on this diagram. So, it's pretty easy to learn Scrum. You can go and do a 2-day course. It's pretty straightforward. But how the hell do you figure out what to build? And as we sort of mentioned in the beginning, reading the Lean Startup will only get you so far. It gives you the inspiration, but it sure as hell doesn't seem to give you the tools. That's my opinion, at least. So I like Henrik's quote here. Sometimes called product discovery, the Agile community has gradually come to the realization that this is a thing, and an important one too. So we got together as this little cross-functional team, and we talked about how do we want to work, because everything that we know about building features at Spotify, we almost had to throw out the door. I mean, if you think about the Agile Manifesto, it talks about how working software is the primary measure of progress or output or something along those lines. Well, in this case, we wanted to actively avoid working software. In fact, working software was was only useful if it helped us validate an assumption that we had. So we didn't necessarily explicitly state these guiding principles, but we did talk a lot about these, and this is sort of my distillation of our conversations in the beginning. So we talked about how we know that we're succeeding in this team in a short period of time is that we're delivering learning rather than working software. We also realized that for us to come up with a really great product, we're going to have to fail at a lot of ideas. So let's come up with lots of ideas and then nail that down into the ones that we think have the most merit, and then test them with end users and then do that again and again. We also realized that for us to be able to move fast and be effective as a team, we must have a strong shared understanding of why we're here and what we're trying to achieve. However, we also value that we should have diverse opinions. So for me, I was actually, out of the people on the team, I don't like running. I suck at running. And it was good to have someone, a few people on the team that really didn't like running, some that sort of did it, but they don't, they do it just because they're trying to lose weight. And then there's the people on the team that love running. Running gets them out of bed in the morning. So it was good to have that sort of mixed mindset on the team. And finally, and this is the really obvious one, but we wanted to focus on the customer. We want to make sure that everything we did was being put in front of end users, because we don't know much about running. We might think we do, but ultimately we don't. So yeah, this is sort of the principles that I sort of put together in terms of the conversations that we had in the beginning. So how we ended up working is we took these sort of ideas of how we want to work and looked at where can I get inspiration from in terms of ways that we could possibly work. And has anyone here read the book Sprint by the two Google Ventures, Jake Knapp, I think it is? Really awesome book, and it didn't exist when we did this. I wish it had, because it's kind of a nice mixture of all these things. But we took some principles from all these different books and really put them in a blender and created a way of working, which I'll briefly go through. So first we started off by sort of a typical team off-site. We got to know each other, what makes each other tick, show some vulnerability in front of each other and build trust. This weird looking graph up here is an activity called Journey Lines. It's a really great way of sharing vulnerability with your team members to build trust quite quickly in a new team. So we did that, and then we looked at sort of some exercises around what problem are we here to solve? Why is this important to Spotify? And then finally we sort of talked about how do we actually work? If we were building a stock standard feature, you could say, okay, we're going to use Scrum, and we can just look at a very simple book, and that'll get us started. But here we almost felt like we had to invent a way of working. So that was pretty challenging. So once we'd sort of gotten some of the basics out of the way, we attempted to visualize our business plan. So we used this concept of a lean canvas. Some of you might have seen this before. And I would actually call this exercise, if you looked at it, if your goal was to fill this out completely, we totally failed this exercise. But what I like that it did for us is that it completely exposed where there are holes in our team understanding of what we were trying to achieve. So when we filled out the customer segments, some people put up that existing users were the primary kind of people that we want to talk to, and others put up new users, so people that don't use Spotify. And that created a very immediate conflict. Are we trying to convince people to come in and use this feature from the outside, or are we trying to get people jazzed and excited that already have Spotify out there running with this feature? Because that really changes how we speak to customers, what kind of customers do we want to speak to? And it really changes the whole thinking for this whole thing. So what this exercise did is it allowed us to go and have a conversation with our chief product officer and say, I hope this isn't sort of a stupid question, but can you remind us, what is the kind of the customer segment that we're going after here? And thankfully he was cool with that, and he informed us and helped us through that. And so mainly I would say, with these kind of exercises, try not to get too hung up on the details. Just use it as a way of being aligned and sort of understanding what you're really here to do. And after a while, this became stale and we threw it out. So the main purpose it served us was to help figuring out whether we're on the right page from the beginning. We then came up with some hypotheses. So we took some sort of practices from Lean UX and started out with some user personas. And we took those user personas and we looked at what do we think are the outcomes for these particular kinds of people. So we looked at three main personas, one being people that sort of don't like running but do it because they should. The others being people that like running and run sort of casually. They enjoy it. They do it to get in touch with nature. They do it because it clears their mind. It's sort of a meditative thing. And then finally, the elite runners that have very specific needs and are trying to do all kinds of wacky things and train for marathons and everything. You can see I'm a big runner here. And so we took these three personas and then we hypothesized what the outcomes we think that they have are. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have those outcomes in mind in terms of what they want to achieve, but we decided to come up with them anyway so that we could at least validate what we think these people will want. And then we chose what outcomes we think we could make the biggest impact on, and then we looked at what kind of features could we come up for this user that will have the outcome that they are wanting to seek. And when I say feature, we tried to abstract the ideas for features away from the implementation. So if you imagine, I want to be notified that I haven't gone for a run in a while. You could say I want a push notification, but that's very implementation specific. So we tried to keep it quite neutral to what kind of technology we were going to use. And then we went out and started testing these hypotheses. So we took at a high level the thinking behind Google's design sprints. And this is kind of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, if you think about these as each days of the week. And we all of us came up with ideas and designs. Even though we had a designer in our team, all of us went out and talked to end users, even though we had a user researcher in the team. So we were truly cross-functional in terms of how we worked. And we did about, I think, roughly 3 or 4 of these sprints before we had enough feedback and data from these experiments. And we then pitched this MVP to the product leads of the company, and that was kind of the intention. We had a period of time, and then we had to pitch to them based on the question of, if you had to build a feature for running, what would that be? So we did. We had about 4 sprints from October to December, and we pitched the MVP. We got the green light to go ahead and build it. In the very beginning, we weren't even sure whether we would be the ones to build it. But by the time we went through this experience, we were very adamant that we should be the ones to build it, because we had all of this tacit knowledge from working together on this. And then we launched it in May 2015. And in terms of how it was perceived by end users and by the press, it was a great success. Some of these quotes are pretty cool. People were pretty happy with it. But of course, this was just when we launched it. In terms of some of the metrics that we'd hoped it would move, that was obviously yet to be seen. And in terms of the public perception, this is what I thought was really cool, is you would see these sort of streaming music roundups, like blog posts, this one from Mashable, and suddenly running integration ends up in this list. That would never have been there before if it weren't for us launching this feature. So that was pretty cool. Of course, we still didn't have Taylor Swift, but so the press coverage was pretty cool, and it was sort of what we'd hoped it would be. Here are sort of my 4 or 5 main kind of learnings from going through this experience, from taking the thoughts behind Lean Startup and actually trying it out in a big company. First off, I think it's really easy to get bogged down in this concept of validating a hypothesis. This is a scientific idea that you would have a hypothesis and you would go out to prove or disprove it. That's a very binary thing. And when you're dealing with feedback from customers on paper prototypes or a prototype where you're clicking keynotes, you just can't sort of prove or disprove. So we stopped talking about validating, and then we started talking about confidence, because we were in this very early conceptual testing part of the project. So I would say that product discovery is this kind of weird balance of science and subjectivity. And things became a lot clearer in our conversations with each other when we started talking about, we have a high level of confidence in this, medium level of confidence in this, and we're very low level of confidence. Most of the literature out there talks very much about metrics, and I think that's because the lean startup sort of gets its roots from being able to set up like landing pages, cheap landing pages to prove something because you have the metrics there. My next learning was to fail. It's good to fail fast at your ideas for your product, but it's equally as good to fail fast at how you work. So this way of working is incredibly complex and difficult, and it requires lots of conversations, everyone doing everything, programmers being taken away from their keyboards to sketch things and have conversations. And it's actually quite frustrating. So our first goal for our first sprint, we set the bar incredibly low. If we can make it to the end of our first sprint and have a retrospective and talk about what we learned from this, that's success if we haven't strangled each other. And also, I think how this way of working is valuable becomes so much clearer once you finally get out there and talk to customers. I cannot stress this enough. Everything you do before that point will seem hard and frustrating and time consuming. So I highly recommend it. Even if you fail miserably, even if your questions are bad, if your approach to user research is awful, just go out there and talk to people. This was perhaps more of a personal learning from myself and the product owner. I think educating stakeholders and understanding how the typical status quo and the context of your stakeholders work in every day and how different this is, and keeping that in mind when you communicate that to them is really important. So if I imagine a day in the life of our chief product officer, he's constantly looking at working software. He's constantly looking at things that work and things that he will assume will eventually reach end users. However, our primary measure of progress was learning. It wasn't working software. So that requires a dramatic context shift in terms of how you communicate and how you talk around something. And I think for the most part, this was very challenging for us because there was this one moment every week, I think it was, for half an hour to an hour, where the rest of his context is working software and suddenly it's this. So I think, my takeaway from this would be that I would try to get much better at setting the expectations around this is how we're working and we're primarily focusing on learning. It made it equally challenging because we also had a prototype that we could show him that was based on a previous hack week, and then he would get very centered around that, so I perhaps would have even have brought that out, for example. And acknowledge and discuss bias. I think, again, to the previous point, be really crucially aware of the place that you work and what your usual status quo is and how you typically work and how this is different, because there's been some talks recently on level 1 and level 2 thinking. I'd highly recommend reading that book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and really thinking about what are your biases coming into this project, because they will so very easily affect how you work, because this is all difficult conversations around what to do, and usually people are the most opinionated on that. And finally, this helps with the bias is to basically visualize everything you've learned so far. You're working so fast and things are so chaotic that it's very easy to forget what you've just learned and make brash assumptions based on things that you think and opinions you have. So I think if you read the book Sprint, he talks a lot about how important it is to have whiteboards and to have wall space and to make sure that you visualize these things. This is super duper important. Basically, your output of what you're doing, your working software, is what's on the walls around you. And finally, you might have heard me mention a few times that this is hard. That's because it really is. And if it seems easy, then I suspect that maybe you're not trying hard enough, or you're simplifying how difficult this is, because it is super hard and it's frustrating, and you're going to argue and you're going to, oh my goodness. Yeah, so if it's easy, you're doing it wrong. Yeah, so that was sort of my key learnings and takeaways. Depending on how much time we have, this is a short video of the launch video that we had when we launched the product. The reason I put this in here is A, I think it's kind of cool, and B, what I thought was a really big win for this project was having the marketing manager for this project on the team, coming up with the ideas for the product, and involved from the very first day. And what was cool about that was, if you were there and you saw the responses from customers and them using the product, for example, we went out running with them every week, or every second week, once in Stockholm and once in New York, once we had a prototype that was working. And all of that sort of feedback that we got from them really came through in the marketing message, because she was there from day one.
Start running. Tempo detected.
Yeah, so that, by the way, that song got so stuck in my head after a while once we launched this product. But yeah, the messages coming through on that marketing message were genuinely people that were trying this product out before we'd launched it, and what they were saying when they were using it, which was really cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed my talk.